Hello, everyone. We have a very special guest today. This is someone that I knew from way back in the day. I worked with her at Gibbs Restaurant. This is Diane Gibbs, and she has a podcast called 420 Reasons That I Quit Drinking. And I wanted to have her on today because I'm just so inspired by her. She is just so incredibly vulnerable when she talks about her story. And we've been talking on the podcast about being vulnerable and overcoming the shame and being willing to share your testimony and what God has done in your life and how powerful that is. And I think Diane has a very powerful testimony. So without further ado, this is my good friend, Diane Gibbs. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I just think the world of you. So, and I'm excited for everything you're doing. So thank you for inviting me here today.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got into the mess that you were into, and then how God orchestrated things to get you out of it.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll try to keep it short, but I started drinking at an early age, at like 12. And that was just something that we did. And that was our way and our mode of fun. At least that's what I thought way back when. And so I did that. I grew up in the church, which I loved, and I was part of choir and I was part of the youth group. And at probably 17, I went to Young Life Camp, and that's when I met God the first time. I met Jesus at Young Life Camp up in Minnesota, and that was really cool. And I had some incredible youth leaders. But you know what? The power of the party seemed to have gotten stronger, and it kind of led me in that direction. I went to college and continued with the party and all my crazy antics. And these are the part of the 420 reasons why I quit drinking. And so I continued on after college. I traveled around Europe for 3 months, and I thought I was going to go back. And my aunt decided to retire from our restaurant to become a missionary. So my family asked me to come and help out for a couple months, and they tricked me into 11 years. Which was remarkable. And during that time, that's when we met, when you had come and you worked at the restaurant. So I had this great, incredible experience there. And then during that time, I reconnected with the Lord, and another church, opened up, and I became a part of that. And I really like met the Lord, and I started to was in a Bible study, and that was really a great thing. I got to say real quick, when I was younger, I always had problems reading, and I hated reading out loud. And during that Bible study, I was healed of that. And so I would read, they go, we need someone to read this passage. And, the Bible has all those big names and those hard to pronounce places. And so I didn't sweat it. I just like kind of jumbled through that part, but it was really cool. And this church of the Path of Life in Ludington really made a big difference in my life. I had gotten engaged and then realized that this wasn't the guy. And I talked to God, and I'm like, what is going on with this? He just doesn't seem the right person. And my aunt had given me something, but it was something about like on the way to the altar, we needed to have our lives right with God before we could have our lives right with one another. And so I called that wedding off, and I was quite fortunate with that. I continued going to church and things, but somehow I met some guy, and I stopped participating in the manner that I had. And then we ended up selling a restaurant, and I moved to Chicago. And in Ludington, I was really involved in the community. I was involved with the Women's Shelter, the Chamber of Commerce, the Visitor and Convention Bureau. I was really all about community. Our restaurant, our family was super involved with the 4-H. And I just love that aspect of being able to give back and participate in helping. And then I moved to Chicago, and I didn't really get involved. I had a job. I was in a food distributor, but it was such a big city. It was really hard to like navigate what church to find a church. And I looked for a long time. I probably looked for like 10, 12 years. And a friend of mine sent me a link about a church called City Church. It was a Hillsong related. And I'm like, oh, I better go and check it out. And I did. And I loved it. And the Lord met me right there and said, welcome home, honey. I've been waiting for you.
Hmm.
So the second time I went back, I got baptized as an adult. And it was cool. And I was super involved in the church. And I met some wonderful people. I got really active in outreach. And that's, like I said, I love doing that part and giving back to the community. There's a organization called Breakthrough Ministries, and they have transitional housing for men and women, and they have a family plex for the neighborhood. It's in East Garfield Park, and they cover like a 27 block radius, and it's a really incredible place. And so that was one of my first times getting back involved deeply. And then I had the opportunity to become the partner relations person with the outreach team. And so I got involved with the schools. We adopted schools. And so I would find out what kind of opportunities that we could do to support those schools. And it was just quite incredible. Oh, and I should actually say a little while back, before I had got involved at church, back in 2011, I met this guy and we started dating. And when we started dating, I told him, I go, well, I drank and I smoked weed. And I told him that I thought I needed to stop smoking weed because I was just munching and eating all the time. And I went away a weekend, and he played me back a message that I left for him. And it was like, oh, it was just sounded ridiculous. And I'm like, I love you. And I'm like, gosh, I just started dating him. What am I saying? And that next time after I saw him, I go, you know what? I think I better quit drinking. And he goes, whatever you need, I'll support you. And then I went to a US Foods conference. That was a company I worked for. And I played a big part. I was the one that sold all the food to the venue. And I was working with the marketing team, and we did this big, huge rebranding. And so, but once it came to the party time, that's what I did. And it was 2 days of it, downtown Chicago. I just got blackout drunk each night. And I just, like, on that Sunday after the conference, I just was feeling so much guilt. And then on Monday, a friend called and asked me if I remembered what happened on that Saturday night. And I said, oh, sure. I left the party and went back to the hotel. And she's like, you didn't. You got escorted out of a bar. And I was like, oh, I go, I had some really cool boots on. And I always would make up, like, because I couldn't remember. I blacked out all the time. And so I'd always go, well, I'd come up with these like assumptions, like I had these cool boots. So I was sure I was kicking my feet up in the air. Maybe I was a little bit inappropriate. And I got escorted out, taken back to the hotel. And, but I didn't know who had helped me or how all that came together. And when she told me that, I just said, God, I cannot do this anymore. So that was on 9/26/11, and I quit drinking alcohol at that point.
Wow.
I told my friends that, I was quitting, and I told my boyfriend, and I said, but this is my problem. It's not any of yours. And I stayed in that party. And that was really like, that was, I thought that I didn't want to lose my friends. I didn't know any other way to go about this.
Hmm.
And so I just stayed in it. I still smoked weed, but I quit the alcohol, which was really my downfall. And a year, almost a year to the date of when I quit, actually 4 days before, my boyfriend died of a massive heart attack.
Gosh.
And it was horrible, of course. And it was just, and I was so fortunate that somehow, and I really wasn't like, so, I mean, of course, I always prayed and was connected to God, but I wasn't back where I was. But God held me through that, and God helped me walk through that time without picking up alcohol. And I just thank God for that, because I never wanted to go back drinking again. I was so grateful not to drink anymore. The burden of that was so heavy and it was so tiring. And fortunately, I've continued. And then I said, I found this church and I just like reconnected to the Lord. And it just has been so incredible. Sharing the word at Breakthrough Ministries, like I said, we would go in, and sometimes a group can go in and feed people, and then, have the interaction and having a community with your people that the church. But really, what we did was we went and sat down with these men and we asked them for their prayer requests. And we developed a program that we would go in and actually share God's word. We would share Bible verses. I always liked Jesus Calling, and they always had like a great message. So if I was like, I didn't have anybody else, I always had that book with me so I could share something out of that, which was great, quite incredible. And then along the way, we built our team up so that we were sharing our testimonies with each other. And we went and started sharing testimonies with those guys, and they started sharing testimonies with us. And it was just, it was really just life changing for me. And I've continued to be involved in the Chicagoland community. And there's an organization called Together Chicago, and they work in the education. And I was on the education team, like I said, that I had worked with the partners, and we did adopt a school, and we did 2 schools that we had adopted, and just participating in that. Besides what the education, they work in the economic field, they work in violence prevention, they have gospel justice centers, and it's a social impact organization that is just doing dynamic things in Chicago. They've more recently, in the past several years, hired gang members to come and work with them, to go into the streets, to interact with these kids and all that violence that's happening out there. And they're making a difference. I mean, slowly but surely. And I just was like, this is an incredible thing that I can see going on in God's hand. And I can't help but to participate in that. We did grocery giveaways for during COVID, and we went into different communities down into Inglewood and meeting more people that were in need, and finding these women that were able to buy a house for $1 and turn it around and make it an after school program for kids. And then getting that Inglewood, which is not a very, it's a not a great area, and they were really doing a lot to support their families. And so it's just, I just am so grateful that God has given me a heart to serve his people. I served people out of my restaurant. My grandfather, that's what it was all about, giving back to the community. My grandfather almost became a priest. Thank God that didn't happen, because we wouldn't be here. But my grandparents, I know that I'm at where I'm at because of the generational blessings of my family. And actually on both sides, my parents are wonderful, like very devout Christians, and really raised us to know the Lord. There are times going back and forth that we would try to, fight. My parents didn't force anything. They always just left it up for us to be a part of it. And just watching my parents walk in faith, I just knew that that's what I wanted. And I just love the Lord. And anytime I talk to my podcast, when I talk about my craziness and the situations, I've encountered the law quite often, and God has really protected me. I know their prayers have protected me from going to jail or getting in more trouble, anything serious. And yeah, so that is a short version of where sort of, and then I've got my podcast in which I've been sharing, and I am on my second season with that. And yeah, it's been interesting because some people are like, are you sure you like don't like you're talking about God? And I said, I have to. I'm not going to like change it to be something else because God has got me here. I'm giving all the glory to God. I'm happy. It's not the universe. It's God. It's
Mhm.
Jesus. And that's what he's holding me tight and he's never letting go of my hand. And so here I am and sharing my story with you.
That's awesome. So when you decided to quit drinking, was it more of like, oh my gosh, like embarrassment that you have to stop this? Or was it like, do you feel like God had his hand in that decision of, coming to help you realize that this had to change?
Yeah. I said I was so tired I couldn't do it anymore. And he says, you don't have to do it anymore. I will, I'm here. I'm here to carry your burden.
Mhm.
And he did. And and I had like three friends that didn't drink. Actually, I had two friends that didn't drink. It was my personal trainer and a good friend. And then a girlfriend of mine, she drank, but not really. And she's like, I'll go to AA with you or whatever you need. Now, I didn't go to AA. I actually did it like on my own. And it was, and not that I was talking to the Lord in the same aspects that I am, but definitely he was very instrumental in it. And probably about 6 months before I found the church, I had been in a really bad depression. And I met this lady on a fluke, and she told me about these morning pages about starting to journal. And I started journaling,
Okay.
and that really on a regular basis made a difference. Now, I've been journaling my whole life. Like I have my journal from when I was in 5th grade, and I have my journals from when I was in high school. But now my journals are all like thanking the Lord and like including scriptures because I can see where he's working and living his word. And I'm so grateful that I didn't have to do it alone. It wasn't the community of AA, it was God's kingdom. And he gave me the resources and the people that I needed to get through it and get
Mhm.
me out of it.
So did you end up going through withdrawals or anything like that? Were you drinking that heavily, or is it just more like a binge drinking?
Oh, I was drinking heavily. I don't really remember any like withdrawals. I mean, I drink every day for sure.
Mhm.
Drink nightly, yeah. And it was like, and even by myself, I'd come home if I'd been out with friends, you open up a bottle of wine. I mean, there were times I was drinking like 2 bottles of wine, and I didn't really have hangovers. So I was like, I got this. And I didn't have this
Wow.
because I was blacked out, and I would go down to my garage to look for my car, and I'd bring my clicker to see if I'd actually driven my car. And sometimes we had a valet, and I said, hey, I had a friend drop off my car. Did you see it? Like, that was a big lie. I
Mhm.
just like, I was afraid to tell anybody that I didn't remember. I didn't
Mhm.
want anybody to know those conversations, the morning after with your friends going, oh, what about last night? I avoided that stuff because I couldn't tell you what had happened the night before.
Mhm.
I was afraid every time after I drank. And I was like, I can't carry this. I cannot do this.
Mhm.
And I finally was able to surrender. And I was so grateful for that friend that had the balls to call me and
Yeah.
say that to me. And it wasn't until like, let's see, I quit my job. So 6 years ago, I was at a US food event. We were after a food show, and I was hanging out with my guys from US. And I go, yeah, the last time I drank was at that US food concert or conference. And they're like, what? And I go, you guys were the last people I drank with. And I go, I don't even know what happened that night. And they go, we do, because we walked you out, Diane.
Mhm.
Ozzy and like Bob, we walked you, got you into a cab, and Bob went with you to the hotel. And guys walked in, and someone caught Bob's attention, and you kept going, and you were leaning sideways. And then like we think you got up to your room, in which I had, but that like it was so many years later that I had no idea. And they
Wow.
had no idea that they were the last ones that had drank with me because I was so ashamed. I would never bring that up and tell
Mhm.
anybody. And as time went along, I had to tell the story. And because there's so many of us that this is the story, and
Mhm.
you need to share it because people need to know that they're not alone in this, and it's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I first of all, I just wanna say that you experienced a miracle because to be drinking that heavily and not have a single withdrawal, like, that is an absolute miracle. From a medical perspective, like, I'm telling you, like, that is a miracle right there. That just wow, that's awesome because there are so many people that, just were like, they're gonna quit cold turkey, and then their bodies basically start to go into withdrawal, and they have seizures, and you can actually die from, just the detox process. So, like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that that for that miracle in your life, and then to be so candid and so willing to share your story. And it's exactly what I've been talking about in my podcast is we have to start being honest. God can't deal with our past if we continue to try to bury it and pretend that we've got everything together. And I think that is the number one key for revival in America or the world. We have to be honest. We have to quit hiding behind this mask of everything. We got everything together, and there's nothing wrong, and like, I don't have any problems. I've never sinned. Like, I don't need Jesus. This is just a lie. It's just a lie. And we all need to be, I guess, the church is still hiding. They don't want to come forth and say, this is what I've been saved from, or this is what I'm struggling with. It's like people are thinking that you have to be perfect as a Christian. Like, there's no grace there. But that's the whole reason that we're there, is that we are seeking that help, that we are seeking to find that deliverance. And oh my gosh, some of the stories that you tell, I'm just like, oh, my heart breaks for you. The stories of, just the way that your mind was working and the thoughts that you had behind the actions. Wow. So thank you so much for your story. It's so powerful and it needs to be told.
Yeah, and I keep telling these stories. I thought these stories, like, we used to laugh about the stories. And I thought my friends we've been saying that we were going to have a TV show, and we were going to tell the stories. And then when I went to do the podcast, I said to my friends, "Okay." And they're like, "No, don't you even mention my name." And I'm like, "What? We've been talking about this. I didn't really get it." And then I finally, like, I went to another friend and I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't even understand that this would be hard for anybody." Because I mean, I know it's hard to tell it, but I just thought because we've been talking about it, they would go, "Oh, okay, I can do that with you." And I had to, like, get that they're still in the party and they're not ready to tell it, and
Mhm.
look at it in the way that I had. And at first it was like ha ha ha, but now I look at the stories and go, "Oh my gosh, the things that I did." Like, I read in my diary in high school, I thought that I needed to get drunk. I read it 3 times. "Oh, I'm going to get drunk and wasted so the boy can take advantage of me."
Mm.
Like, that just broke my heart, that that's how I thought it should have been. And
Yeah.
that was my thought for so many years. I drank for 30 years
Mm.
and it was so tiring. And finally, like, it's not like life is so much better. And then with the podcast, I have people listening, and I know, like, I have friends that reach out, different friends from high school. But about in was it April? A gal reached out and said, "Hey, just so you know, I found your podcast and you helped me save myself. So save
Mm.
me from myself. And I listened to you and I was just like, oh my gosh, there's my person."
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful. And then this past week, I've been doing a Sober Curious challenge. And during that time, I've quit smoking pot. And I'm so glad for it. And it feels really good. And the gal that found me, she's been doing this Sober Curious challenge with me, and it's been quite incredible. And I have another friend that hasn't been able to participate, but she's like, I'm listening, and and we're gonna get together. I'm gonna see her later on down in like a month or two, and just to know that and this is actually my second Sober Curious challenge, and I did it last year, and I had people from my high school, and I had a gentleman from like New Zealand, and I'm pretty sure he's no longer drinking too. And so God has really let these stories that I thought were just so funny and crazy really makes me understand how not they were quite scary. Some were tragic. I'm so, like I said, God's what protection was with me because I'm still here,
Mm-hmm.
and I am able to share these stories. And I'm so much better with Jesus, and he's just leading the way and getting me through all of this and continuing to like get me out there to keep on sharing the stories. And there were times it was so hard for me to do the podcast, and I wanted to get it out by Wednesday, at my 4:20 time, and I was getting out at Wednesday at 5, and I'm like, what is this? And I mean, they're not easy stories. I lost my innocence to alcohol, one of the stories, and how that all came about. But God has he sits right next to me. He's like my co-host. I've been looking for a co-host, and I got to remember it's Jesus.
Yeah.
And he's the co-host, like holding my hand as I tell the story. And I'm grateful for it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I just pray a blessing on you, Diane, that your words would not return void, that they would be God's words, and that you would bring life and healing in every corner of globe. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Don't ever stop. I'm so blessed by you.
Thank you. I'm so blessed by you too.
Wasn't that amazing? I am just in such awe of God's goodness and faithfulness. It's so encouraging to hear a story of someone who God just would not let go. Diane's story is one of God's relentless pursuit and love for Diane, and how God finally reached her when she finally came to the end of herself and said, I can't do this anymore. It took her being honest about where she was, and then begin to take steps towards walking away from the behavior that had just wreaked havoc in her life. I'm so encouraged by her story, and to know that I'm not alone, that there are others out there that, even though they're Christians, profess Jesus as Lord, they still struggle. Struggling is not wrong. It's when we just give up and give into it, and we're not allowing God to move in our lives, that we are essentially walking away from God. It's not perfection. The Christian walk is not perfection. Jesus just won't ever let us go. That's the one thing we can depend on. And as we stumble and sometimes crawl our way through this life, it's just so amazing to know that He won't leave us. He won't forsake us. He continually pursues us and tries to woo us back. So I hope that you found this interview encouraging and inspiring as I found it. I love Diane's honesty and vulnerability to share these stories that she does on the 420 Reasons Why I Quit Drinking podcast, and sharing with us today about just being honest about where she was and what it took for her to change her behavior. Like she said, there's so many out there that feel like they're alone, and I want you to know you're not alone. There's things that I have struggled with over the years, habits and ways of thinking, and the words that I've been speaking out of my mouth that I've had to change. I've had to evaluate what I'm doing in light of who I claim that I am. Christians aren't perfect. They are just forgiven. And they are on a journey towards becoming ever more like Christ. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Be blessed.